You're about to take a deep dive into one of the biggest true crime cases in the universe, or at least on our part of the planet. From the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.
Hey everyone, buckle up because today we're doing a deep dive into a story that's massively shocking and honestly feels a little too familiar these days.
Yeah.
We're unpacking the indictment of Sean Combs.
Exactly.
Yes. That's Sean Combs.
Right.
The music mogul, the brand, the legend. To understand exactly what he's accused of and the potential impact this could have.
Yeah, this isn't just another celebrity scandal, though.
Right.
This deep dive is going to take us through a legal document that reads more like a crime thriller, with accusations that go way beyond bad behavior.
Seriously, you said it.
Yeah.
We're talking about accusations of a full-blown criminal enterprise allegedly orchestrated by Combs himself.
Right.
Now, I know criminal enterprise sounds like something straight out of a movie, but trust me,
Oh, yeah.
its implications are very real. Thankfully, we've got you here to help us break it all down.
Absolutely. What's fascinating here is that prosecutors aren't just going after Combs for individual actions. They're alleging a pattern of illegal activity designed to exert power and control.
Okay.
We're talking racketeering charges, which are usually reserved for organized crime.
Okay, so let's unpack that term, racketeering, because it sounds incredibly serious and, let's be honest, a little intimidating.
Right.
What does it actually mean in this context?
Basically, it means that instead of just a few isolated incidents, Combs is accused of using his various companies, Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, Combs Global, and more, as tools for criminal activity.
Wow.
This isn't just about one bad decision. It's about an alleged system built to control and allegedly exploit others.
Wow, that's a chilling thought. And the scope of this alleged enterprise is mind-blowing.
Absolutely.
We're talking about potentially covering up serious crimes, using manipulation and intimidation to silence people, and even using drugs to coerce others.
Exactly. The indictment alleges that Combs and his associates were allegedly in the habit of using a variety of tactics to get what they wanted: manipulation, intimidation, and even resorting to physical and emotional abuse.
And then there's this whole freak-off thing, which, honestly, the term itself sounds unsettling.
Yeah.
But the indictment alleges these events were far darker than just wild parties.
Right. It's important to understand that these freak-offs are being painted as something much more calculated and sinister.
Okay.
The indictment alleges they involve transporting women for commercial sex, which is sex trafficking, and a serious crime on its own.
It makes you wonder, how could this allegedly go on for so long without anyone knowing? Were there people around him, employees even, who were allegedly involved?
That's precisely what the indictment suggests.
Yeah.
It claims that Combs' employees were allegedly instrumental in keeping this whole operation running smoothly and under the radar.
So we're not just talking about turning a blind eye, but potentially actively participating in covering up these serious allegations. That's heavy stuff.
Yes, and it gets even darker. The indictment alleges these employees were allegedly involved in everything from booking hotel rooms, arranging travel, and providing financial support, to allegedly bribing witnesses and covering up evidence.
Wait, hold up. Bribing witnesses and hotel staff? That's a whole different level of alleged corruption and control.
Right.
It really highlights the potential reach Combs' power allegedly had.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The accusations get even more disturbing when we start looking at the alleged violence that played a role in maintaining this alleged system of control.
Okay, we need to address the elephant in the room.
Right.
This wasn't just about manipulation and intimidation. We're talking about accusations of violence, serious violence being used to silence people.
Yes, the indictment outlines alleged acts of kidnapping, arson, and brandishing firearms as a way to allegedly intimidate anyone who might expose what was going on. And it gets worse.
How can it get any worse than that?
Well, it goes from alleged threats to alleged reality. The indictment points to a 2016 assault that was caught on video, adding another layer of disturbing reality to these accusations.
And it really makes you question how much of this alleged behavior might have been hidden in plain sight. But what about the victims? Their stories, their experiences are central to this whole thing, right?
Absolutely. It's their bravery, their willingness to come forward, despite the potential risks that made this indictment possible in the first place.
It's a good point, because I can only imagine how difficult and terrifying it must be to speak out against someone with that much power and influence.
You're right. Which is all the more reason why it's so important to acknowledge their courage. But their stories, the potential human cost of this whole alleged operation, That deserves its own deep dive.
You're telling me. So before we get into the details of the alleged crimes, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll unpack the specific charges against Sean Combs and what those charges could mean for him if he's found guilty. Stay with us.
We're back, and it's hard to believe we're talking about the same Sean Combs whose music has been the soundtrack to so many lives, including Ryan.
Right.
But as we dig deeper into this indictment, it's clear that the accusations against him are incredibly serious.
Absolutely.
And if true, paint a very different picture of the man behind the music.
It's a stark reminder that things aren't always as they appear, especially when dealing with power dynamics like those in the music industry. Now, before the break, we started to unpack the idea of a racketeering conspiracy, which is at the heart of this indictment.
Right, and I have to admit, that term still throws me off a little.
Yeah.
It feels like something you'd see in a movie about the mafia, not about a music mogul.
Right.
Can you explain why this charge in particular is such a big deal?
It's a big deal because it allows prosecutors to go after not just individual crimes, but the entire alleged system that enabled those crimes. If they can prove a pattern of racketeering.
It means Combs could be facing penalties far more severe than if you were charged with each offense separately.
So instead of just facing consequences for each individual action, he's potentially facing consequences for allegedly using his entire enterprise as a tool for criminal activity.
Exactly. We're potentially talking decades in prison and massive fines, all because of the added weight of that racketeering charge. But it doesn't stop there. The indictment also lists a laundry list of other offenses: kidnapping, arson, bribery. The list goes on.
It's wild to think about how many different laws are allegedly tied into this one alleged operation. It's like something out of a movie.
And each of those charges carries its own set of serious implications. For example, the indictment alleges that arson was used as a tactic to intimidate people. Imagine living with that kind of fear, knowing that someone could allegedly resort to something so extreme.
It's terrifying to think about the impact on the victims, not just physically, but emotionally as well. And speaking of impact, you mentioned fines earlier.
Right.
But the indictment also mentions something called forfeiture.
Right.
Can you explain what that means and why it's significant in this case?
Forfeiture is a powerful tool that allows the government to seize assets they believe were obtained through illegal activities. So in this case, we're not just talking about Combs potentially paying a fine. We're talking about him potentially losing property, money, maybe even parts of his companies, if it's proven they were connected to these alleged crimes.
So we're talking about the potential dismantling of an empire. Combs has worked his whole life to build a business, a brand, a legacy. Could all of that be at stake?
Potentially, yes. It all depends on what prosecutors can prove in court. Can they demonstrate a direct link between his businesses and the alleged criminal activity? If so, the consequences could be far-reaching.
Wow. It's hard to even grasp the magnitude of what's at stake here, both for Sean Combs and for the many people whose lives he's touched. It's a lot to process, but we've only scratched the surface.
You're right. While the legal ramifications are significant, we can't lose sight of the human beings at the center of these accusations. The alleged victims in this case, their stories and their willingness to speak out despite the immense pressure they must have faced, deserve our attention and respect.
Absolutely. Their experiences are a stark reminder that behind the headlines and legal jargon are real people whose lives have been deeply impacted. So let's take another quick break to collect ourselves, then come back to discuss the human cost of this complex and deeply disturbing case. We're back, and I have to say, this deep dive into Sean Combs' indictment has been a roller coaster. We've covered the alleged criminal enterprise, the serious charges, the potential consequences, but we can't forget that at the heart of this story are the alleged victims.
You're absolutely right. It's easy to get caught up in the legal complexities to talk of racketeering and forfeiture.
Right.
But we can't lose sight of the human cost of these alleged crimes.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that we're not just talking about a celebrity scandal. We're talking about real people who've allegedly endured unimaginable experiences. Reading through the indictment, it seems like some of these alleged victims were specifically targeted because of their vulnerability.
That's a tragic pattern we often see in cases like this. The indictment suggests that Combs and his associates may have preyed on individuals they believed were less likely to speak out, less likely to be believed if they did.
That's just heartbreaking. To think that someone would exploit another person's vulnerability for their own gain is simply unconscionable. And to think that they might have gotten away with it had the victims not been incredibly brave in coming forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It takes immense courage to speak out against anyone, let alone someone as powerful and influential as Sean Combs. We need to acknowledge the strength it took for these individuals to come forward and share their stories.
Yeah, they risked their reputations, their careers, potentially even their safety by speaking out. It makes you wonder, how many other stories like this are out there, hidden in the shadows because people are too afraid to come forward?
It's a question we have to ask ourselves. It highlights the systemic issues that often silence victims and protect abusers. We need to believe survivors, we need to listen to their stories, and we need to create a culture where they feel safe coming forward.
And it's not just about believing them, it's about supporting them. There are organizations out there doing incredible work to help survivors of trafficking and abuse rebuild their lives.
Exactly. Organizations like the National Human Trafficking Hotline and the Polaris Project provide essential resources and support to survivors. We'll be sure to include links to those organizations in our show notes for anyone who wants to learn more or offer their support.
This whole situation is bigger than Sean Combs, and it's bigger than just the music industry. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, exploitation, and the responsibility we all have to create a safer, more just world.
You said it. This deep dive has been a wake-up call, reminding us that we all have a role to play in challenging these systems of abuse.
So what can we do? How do we move forward from this conversation with more than just a heavy heart?
It starts with awareness, with talking about these issues openly and honestly. It's about supporting organizations that are fighting for justice and equality. And it's about being mindful of our own choices as consumers.
You're right. We can't just sit back and be passive observers. We need to be informed, we need to speak out against injustice, and we need to use our voices and our wallets to support a better future.
Well said. This case is still unfolding, and there are many unanswered questions. But for now, let's focus on listening, learning, and supporting one another in creating a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and empowered.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This deep dive has been tough, but incredibly important. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that matters. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.
Let's be honest. Nothing kills the thrill of a good murder mystery like a commercial for laundry detergent. It's like someone slapping a closed sign on your favorite dive bar. But you're not here for that, are you? You're here for the good stuff. So ditch the ads and upgrade to True Crime Today Premium Plus on Apple Podcasts. With True Crime Today Premium Plus, you get your crime straight, no chaser. Commercial-free with extended interviews and early access. It's like getting the bartender's special when the bar's already closed. Search for True Crime Today Premium Plus on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and drink it all in.